This morning we're going to talk a little bit about RMC, client, supplier management, relationship. Why do we do that? We have invited the RMCs, and we do that every year, that we have a conference to speak with FIDI and to reach out to them. And there's reasons for doing that. We think there is a good exchange of views on where the industry is going, what is important to the customers nowadays. We can inform them about us, what FIDI is doing, our strategic options, where FAME is heading to, because that's important for them to know. Because whether we like it or not, RMCs represent a very important customer base that we may not have access to directly. And therefore RMCs are in between the customers and us, and therefore we need to talk to them from time to time. Which brings me to my very first question. Perhaps, Ben, you can answer that one. Are RMCs still the enemy like they used to be?
Well, a few minutes ago we were reminding ourselves, maybe 20 years ago I was asked to speak in Rio at a FIDI meeting, and I was asked to represent the pro-RMC position versus at the time, the sort of anti, that the RMC is the enemy position. And we were not really a full-fledged RMC. Graebel was not at the time. And so I think my message at the time is that RMC relationship with client was developed because of client need, and that it was the future. And again, I don't know that I'm that smart about being able to see the future, but I sincerely hope that we've really moved way past that thought process. I think, meaning I almost think that the question now is maybe less relevant today, because I think we all know that there is a role for RMCs, there is a role for move managers, there are roles for a variety of models that clients are looking for today. So I hope that's not an issue today.
Yeah, Jim, you could also see that movers are a supply chain, and you guys are the ones who give out the orders. Are we getting to a partnership as well slowly, instead of just that relationship between?
I believe we are. I mean, RMCs can't move people, right? At the end of the day, we're totally reliant on our supply chains. Whether we do pieces of it internally or externally, it doesn't matter. There's still a supply chain component there. So I think inherently that relationship is a partnership. It needs to be a partnership, because ultimately we're both trying to achieve the same goal, and that is to take care of our customers, right? To deliver an outstanding customer experience. We can only do that together. I can't do it by myself. You can't do it by yourself. We need to help each other be successful, play to each other's strengths, and I think that that's really critical.
Just so you to know, there were two parts in that meeting that we had. The first part was mostly about FAME, and we'll talk about in a second. The second part was about corporate sustainability, which is very high on everyone's agenda. So we'll do that the same thing. But we certainly want to hear from you during this session. So this is going to be like a workshop business session, meaning that we want to hear from you. Interaction is important. So after we've done a couple of questions, we're going to open the floor and see where it gets us. So don't hold back in that respect. That's important as well to know. What did you think of Drew? What did you think of the meeting we had about FAME in general? How did you perceive that?
So I thought it went very well. It was very well done. I think the direction that FAME is headed is a positive direction. It's a foundational program for our industry, and it's important. Obviously, at the end of the day, it is all about the quality of service. RMCs don't get fired for not having a sustainability program yet, but they do get fired when a VIP move gets screwed up. And so the fact that you've got controls in place and processes in place relative to quality is absolutely critical as a mover, or as an RMC.
Yeah. What do you cuss with Eric? Going to you. Sorry, Eric. I have to introduce you. I should have done that. I'm so sorry. I think you all know them normally, but Eric is from Aires, obviously. Eric Tate, and then we have Jim from Altair. We have Drew from SIRVA, and Ben from Graebel. Eric, what do your customers think of the new elements in the FAME 2022 standard, particularly the ones like digitalization, cybersecurity, risk management, corporate sustainability? What do you think they think about that?
Yeah, I think just to touch on what Drew said, I think maybe now you're not getting fired for not having them, but I think going forward, and it's starting already, you're not getting to the table if you don't have those. So cybersecurity, I think, was kind of the first one that really came in as, I think we have now 10 people just in our IT security team, which are answering questions on RFPs and making sure that, everything we have are locked down. But I think going forward, it's already started. Corporate sustainability has been something that kind of was talked about a little bit in the background for a while, and then in ERCs it became a bigger topic, and then it came to FIDI and IAM and the different organizations. But it's table stakes at this point. And oftentimes, I would say even 5 years ago, if you were working with a government contractor or a bank where the security was even more important to them, they were kind of vetting you after the fact. Now a lot of that vetting is happening before you're even getting an RFP. You're having to show that you adhere to those standards in all of those categories. And if you look on any of our corporate clients' websites, your corporate client websites, all of them have sustainability plans.
So does it mean that compliance is no longer an afterthought, but more a prerequisite?
It's 100% a prerequisite. And I think showing your value on how you differentiate yourself in those areas is the key to continued success going forward.
Yeah. Why is cybersecurity so important then?
I think it's sort of obvious. I mean, I think we all are just understand the risks are significant. And again, I'm not super competent to be able to really explain it, but I think common sense really tells us. We hear stories. We have so much important personal data on our families, and I think the other day we were talking about taking care of our family's goods, and taking care of our family's information is probably almost equally as important.
Is that a sign of quality?
I think so, absolutely.
Yeah? You all agree with that one?
Absolutely, yeah.
It's not just packing a box, it's more than that, right?
Well, and to Eric's point as well, these requirements that are coming through with respect to cybersecurity and PII protection and so on, obviously many of those things are legislated now, right? But our clients are saying to us, and in prospects that we see, and I'm sure we all see it, you will now cascade this down throughout your entire supply chain. So you are vouching for or certifying that your supply chain is as compliant as you are, and that's a requirement totally. So,
Yeah, for sure. We're all only as strong as our weakest link in our
that's
chain.
right.
So if that's why we're vetting through the processes throughout the entire chain in all services in global mobility.
What else do you expect on the data side? Do they expect to get more reporting? What kind of reporting are they expecting?
Data mining is huge.
Yeah.
I think just everywhere, it seems like, right? Data analytics, access to information, when they want it, how they want to see it. So a lot of demand for ad hoc reporting and so on. We see that for sure.
Can you be practical about that? For example, what kind of data they would want from moving companies?
I think we should be practical about it, right? I think in general, our customers will like high-level data until they ask for more detail on a specific move, and then you've got to have the ability to drive into the detail pretty quickly, and I think most of us are capable of doing that. The question is whether that's easy to come by that data or difficult to come by that data, right?
Yeah.
You'd prefer to have that at hand when they call you versus having to make a few phone calls and get back to them.
Yeah.
That's
I
what
think the other thing I'd like to say on the cybersecurity importance for us is, I think most people realize that RMCs in the U.S. domestic market are involved in real estate transactions. Those transactions involve hundreds of thousands of dollars. We are a target for those. Some of those criminals figure that out, and we become targeted by them for phishing and things. We've been party to customers redirecting their payments or to different bank accounts and money being stolen. So it's a real threat with real dollars at stake and reputational integrity at stake.
Sorry,
I
Eric?
was just saying, I think it's along the same lines of the more information they're looking for is involving things like emissions and all of those things. But more than that, they're looking for the speed of it and integrations between companies, RMCs, partners, to make sure that those systems are integrated so that the speed of information they're getting is faster and the accuracy of information is faster, and that they have it at their fingertips. To Drew's point, they may not ever look at it, but they want to know that if they want to, it's there, and that it's real-time data for them.
So, for example, sorry, Ben, I didn't want to interrupt you. Go ahead.
I'll just add that I think that the relocation global mobility professional now wants to be more strategic within their organization, and so they're looking for information. and you know, the recent events in Ukraine or whatever. I mean, and also just diversity. You know, they're looking for data, they're looking for trends, they're looking for information beyond just how many people were moved and where were they moved to and so on. So I think it all ties together.
If everything is data-driven, then it drives us to technology somehow as well. I'm a traditional mover. I was a traditional mover when I did moving, and if they would ask me to do a survey today, I would get out a piece of paper and a pen, and I can still do it, but nobody will be able to read it, I suppose, whatever I write down. Is that still acceptable nowadays?
I'll say no, meaning I know it still exists. I know we have to be open to it. We know that it's not practical to say absolutely. But we do have a client maybe a year and a half ago where you're explaining that we now have more electronic, and even pre-COVID that there was an electronic or there was a virtual survey. And the client basically said, well, if this is best practice, when are you going to be at 100%? And their expectation, well, if it's a good thing, well, is it a year? Is it 2 years? So I think the answer is yes, for me.
I saw you all hesitating a bit before
Yeah, I
answering.
think it's a maybe for me. I mean, I think, you know, it's kind of country by it's custom by country specific a little bit, where I think there are some places where paper surveys are still the norm. And much like you, Jesse, if I was doing a survey, I would pull out a piece of paper and do it on that way. But I think we need to be sensitive to what is normal and customary, while encouraging them to adapt with change, but understanding that it's not everywhere yet. Probably the paper survey isn't customary.
But it will be down the line.
It will be for sure.
Yeah, eventually. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
For sure.
For sure. Good. Technology requires investment, obviously, and not only technology, but corporate sustainability, cybersecurity, all that kind of stuff requires investment from the movers, which is acceptable, no doubt. Do your customers understand that this will transpire into prices as well, that prices will go up due to that?
They should. I mean, it's something we talked about in our session on Saturday. And, you know, I think that to the extent that movers can, and suppliers in general, can educate RMCs on the specifics around that, we can reinforce that message to the client. And I think that's a role of the RMC, is to be a supplier's advocate with their client and to help them understand the realities of the consequences of what it is they're asking for, right? There's a cost to it. There's a cost to all of us to comply and to continue to hire a robust IT staff and it's continuous investment on our part as well. It's completely appropriate in my mind to pass that cost along. And so long as you can articulate it, you can defend it, you can explain it, you can help them understand exactly how it is you came by that, so that there is that transparency. But I don't see anything wrong with that. I think it's the cost of doing business.
All agree?
Yeah, I mean, I would love to disagree with my friendly competitors, but I agree. I mean, I think the bottom line is it's incumbent on us to show the value and to sell the value. It's incumbent on the movers to show the value to the customers, us sometimes being that customer, and it's incumbent on us to demonstrate the value of the investment and the justification for the increase in costs.
So are we shifting? Sorry, Ben?
I'll just say that I think that we have to be open that there are going to be some things that should save money and should make us more efficient. So I don't think a client will always want to be hearing, well, this comes at a cost. I mean, I think they're going to be expecting that some things are you're becoming more efficient, you're saving things. I think from a sustainability standpoint, I think there's some things that you can do sustainability that actually reduces your costs. So I just think we need to keep that in the conversation.
Yeah. Do we see a shift from the cost focus, which was there in the past years, no doubt, before COVID? Do we see a shift towards compliance requirements that are more important than the cost is? And I realize cost is still going to be major, no doubt. But I remember from my time that when you prepared an RFP response of 50 pages, they would flip to the last page of the rates, and they didn't mind all the rest. Is that changing now a little bit?
I think that the IT component, the compliance component, is definitely receiving a lot of scrutiny. I think the days of flipping back and looking at solely the price are over, because clients can't afford to do it, because there is too much at risk, like what you were talking about earlier. There's too much at stake if something goes wrong on the compliance side.
But if these costs,
So I think that when you're talking about IT, I think the compliance element is more table stakes. I'm picking up that term from Aires now, right? Or table stakes. I think they're looking at the value that the IT brings to them, right? So functionality, there's a big emphasis on that. I mean, we can spend 8 figures on technology every year, right? Do we get to price that into our prices? Of course not. So it depends, but I think the compliance element is a criticality in the technology component for sure.
A few
Not
years
the
ago,
only component.
A few years ago, the relocation part, and particularly the moving part of a relocation, the full picture was maybe 2 or 3% of the total cost. If we now see with the cost increases we have, there's inflation everywhere. Obviously, we have the freight that is exploding. That is going to go bigger. Will that affect the number of moves? Will that affect the number of expats going around? Or do you think that is a temporary situation and will just be business as usual?
I think that the idea of companies are trying to minimize the amount that they ship for 2 reasons: to reduce cost, and also, in theory, to reduce cost, and also to reduce their carbon footprint. So I think the ideas of discard and donate programs, I mean, it was something that was a little bit boutique probably 5 years ago. Now, the majority of clients probably have some kind of a discard and donate program. But it's not necessarily always bad for the mover. Smaller doesn't mean bad, as long as we're continuing to move people. What we all don't want is a pure, lump sum, do your own thing program, because you end up with people not bringing anything because they want to keep the cash. So I know there's a lot of hybrid programs, a lot of kind of core flex programs that are becoming a lot more popular, where as opposed to a lump sum, they have a kind of a point system where they can pick and choose, and moving is obviously a huge aspect of that. So I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. The idea of sustainability is good for all of us. And I do think companies are, I think there was it used to be a very human resource decision in the US, and then it became a very procurement decision. And I think now procurement is involved, but it's still being led by human resource, because I think that relocation journey, I think talent management is getting much more connected to mobility, which has been a long time coming. And I think when they're truly looking at a return on investment of that 100% of the cost of that overseas assignment, I think they are looking at being able to see the value of investing more up front to make sure that their families are better taken care of.
Okay, thank you. One of the major concerns that we have at FIDI, or concerns that are coming to us from our members, are payment terms. We've seen, in my view, ridiculous payment terms being imposed on movers very often, and being accepted as well, to my surprise sometimes. What we're now seeing is that there's considerable pushback to that all of a sudden, and no doubt COVID had something to do with that, giving cash issues for everywhere. So there's going to be pushback to that. Can you relate to that? Is that easy for you to talk to your customers about this, Drew?
Top of mind for us, we just walked away from a big customer opportunity because the payment terms, they were inflexible in the payment terms, and they were just unacceptable. So I think there's that moment where you have to make a decision. You have to know your limits, right? So is there ability to push back? Yeah, but in that case, as we pushed back, the answer was no flexibility, right? So you have to be willing to walk away, I think, is the other element of that.
Is it part of financial sustainability?
I think so. I think that the economic piece of sustainability is very, very important. And so we have to have practices that sustain our companies. And I do think RMC has to respond to clients' expectations. And I hope that the extremely long terms that you saw maybe a year or two ago, hopefully there's a little bit that's less common today. It seems, I can't statistically say that. I hope so. It does seem like there's more commonality, that organizations can't really accept that or won't accept that. So I think that's good. But absolutely, economic is a piece of sustainability.
Yeah. What role does FAME play in your supply chain management, Jim?
It's a critical role for us. We won't entertain adding a new supplier to our network that's not FAME certified. Because for us, the FAME certification wraps that supplier around in a certain level of credibility, immediate credibility. So yes, you could say it's a certain level of checking the box, but I think to use that term in this scenario is okay, because you really do want to make sure that that box is checked, right? And that they have met a threshold of accounting practices and they've been through rigorous audits and so on. And so that gives our clients comfort. And in RFPs, when we talk through our supply chain, we mention the FAME certification and what that means, you know, and the benefit that that provides. So to us, to our clients and customers. So that's critical.
Same for you, Drew?
Well, no, we're not as strict as that, being a, you know, absolute requirement. But again, as I said at the start, the foundational quality programs are critical to success. So in the sense that FAME is probably the standard, of course, it's important, right? The good thing, you know, the good elements of FAME are the integrity of the company, the background, the economic assurances that the company's here to stay. That's something that's become a lot more important to clients, is the sustainability of supply chain. Despite them changing payment terms on us, right? They wanted us to ensure that the mover we're using in Qatar is sustainable, right? And going to be there, right? And that's become clear during the pandemic as a risk. It's become more evident to our customers and to all of us, I'm sure.
Eric, how does it work for you?
Yeah, we're more along the lines of, as a FIDI member ourselves, right? So ourselves, Graebel, we kind of wear two different hats in this conversation of being an RMC and a forwarder. Is 100% of our moving supply chain FIDI FAME? No. It's probably 95, and those 5% that aren't, we're working with and encouraging to become FIDI, because that FAME certification is extremely important to us, and it is something we sell to our corporate clients as well.
I'll just add, I think we're in a very similar situation. And maybe 5 or 10 years ago, it was that we were a FIDI member and we believed in FIDI and whatever. And increasingly, I think it's more part of our supplier criteria. So the stronger FAME is, the more important it is that it's the driver of our, you know, international household good supplier development processes.
Will it go a step further in the sense that you guys ask for an awful lot of stuff to sign when you start working with an RMC, which are very often already covered by FAME? What we'd like to see, of course, is a reduction of all those things to sign. Is that happening already, or are we going there somewhere?
I would love for us to go there, frankly, because it's embarrassing for me as an American-based company to go to a European client or a supplier and ask for all of these things. Part of that is societal driven, right? I mean, our society in the U.S. is very litigious, unfortunately. So all we see are risks and ways to try to cover that risk. And I think that it does become clumsy, really, in a way. If there is a way that we can somehow leverage those qualifications and get a comfort level there, then I think I would support that wholeheartedly.
Eric, having been through FAME audits, no doubt yourself, you know that signing a document is one thing. Yeah. And if you ask someone to sign a document, and they'll do, but you will not be able to audit it really. And in FAME, as you know, we audit it. That is not only signed, but it's communicated, it's trained, et cetera, et cetera. So that would work for you, right?
Yeah, for sure. And you know, we do internal audits and external audits. The internal audits are actually a lot harder because they know what to look for even better, I think, than EY. But I think, first of all, I think EY being attached to that carries a lot of credibility. You know, the Ernst & Young obviously is, or Ernst Young, I think they dropped the and, is a super credible name that lends to a lot of acceptance of just, you know, mentioning that they're the auditor. But usually I try to travel during the FAME audits. I try to make sure I'm on the road to not get myself in trouble. But when I have been there, you know, it's something that we talk about three steps of our stool of, you know, people, process, and technology, and that FAME is that process part. And without any of those three legs, the stool is going to topple. So FAME is super important for us, and we'll continue to support that with our partner network as well.
What else can FIDI do as an association, you think? What else should we be looking for? Drew, what do you think? Where do we start?
Where to start? No. Look, I think the world is changing rapidly, and so I think FIDI has a unique position of having, you know, a vast network of high-quality companies that can aggregate information quickly. So I see FIDI as a resource potentially for aggregating changes that are going on in Ukraine, for instance, or the Russian border right now. I think there's value to getting that information out from your members who are likely very much in the know. I can tell you, and I'm sure it's the same for the other RMCs, we have teams meeting daily to figure out the changes that are going on with situations such as this, right? Because it is changing daily, right? And so anybody who can aggregate that information with credibility and reduce our reliance on having to put our resources on it is kind of a return on investment in many ways. So I would think that situations like that come first to mind. I'm sure there's a dozen other ways.
Some other ways. What are you expecting from FIDI in the coming years?
I think education is critical. As was mentioned, I see us working together in a more consistent, maybe organized way in an effort to educate our clients and to help reinforce what your mission is in the industry. And I think because of the value add, the training, the certifications, the quality components, all of that is incredibly important and reassures me as an RMC buyer that we're dealing with quality suppliers. And I think that anything that would further that, I love the emphasis on technology, the digitalization, all of that is really key because that can be a springboard for a whole host of efficiencies that can be realized by the supplier, by the RMC, and by the client and customer. So I think that's where I would like to see FIDI really dive a little bit deeper, perhaps.
Ben, what do you think? You've been in FIDI for such a long time already.
Well, I think it's similar to all the comments is just, I think none of our organizations can or should do it on our own. In other words, FIDI and the other associations provide that value of pulling like-minded standards together and being the experts of an area. The one area that I don't think we haven't mentioned yet is that I think working with the other associations so that there's not duplications, and I know you're doing a great job doing that already. There's a lot more of that happening today than happened 5 or 6, 10 years ago. And so I think all the associations need to really also work closely together so that we're all working on some of these things. Some of these things really are not, should not be, competitive issues, sustainability, whatever. In other words, I think information sharing is incredibly important.
Before we go down corporate sustainability, perhaps I would like to see if there's any questions from the audience at this time on the stuff that we've discussed so far. I know you would love to ask a question, but feel free to raise your hand with any questions you may have. Otherwise, it's going to be a very short session. There you are, Steve. Yeah. Always willing to serve. That was good.
Thank you, Jesse. I'm just trying to decide which of the questions that I've written down here I should ask. But just to go for one, Jim, I think you mentioned early on about the responsibility for compliance being passed down the line through the supplier network. And you also just mentioned about how in the US it's a very litigious society, which we all know. And I just wonder how RMCs ensure that their supplier chain is compliant. And the important word being ensure, rather than have some kind of self-certification that says, yes, we are, and we tick a box. How do you make certain that that is the case?
Well, believe it or not, in the old days, prior to COVID, we would actually travel around to key suppliers, not every one, because we couldn't, but key suppliers and actually do physical audits ourselves. And that helped us with that. But obviously, we had to rely on other methods to make sure that there was compliance. So we do a compliance assessment every year of our supply chain. Many of you have been subject to that, where they attest that they are compliant, and here are the documents, here's the policies, here are the procedures that we have in place. And so they provide those to us, and we examine them and determine through a third party whether or not they truly are compliant. That, I would say, is our main vehicle right now in ensuring compliance of the supply chain. And I think also it is about, and we discussed this on Saturday, it is about proportionality to your business, right? Your ability to purchase certain types of insurance, for example. It's limited based on where you physically are located size of your company, where it is you're doing business. So we take that into account as well.
Can I give an example of something that went a bit got out of hand a little bit? When GDPR hit,
Yeah.
I do remember a number of RMCs, and I've seen examples of those, sending documentation to their supply chain, 40, 50 pages, written by lawyers, not one lawyer, 10 lawyers likely, with language that I didn't get, and supply chain being asked, sign this. And funny enough, they all did.
Yeah.
I'm quite sure they did not read it completely. Should we get away from this kind of stuff, Eric?
Well, I mean, I think it'd be great to get away from that kind of stuff, but we're getting that requirement from our corporate client, right? So we didn't wake up yesterday and say, hey, we want to make this really difficult for you, and
But can't you push back then with proportionality, saying, hey, what are we talking about here?
When it came to GDPR specifically, that's a great example. There was no pushing back. You were compliant as some wanted us to be just a processor, some wanted us to actually take the GDPR compliancy, depending on how they read those rules. So, which there's not any set rules, so there's certainly interpretation, and probably all of us were in situations where we were engaging lawyers to kind of plead on our behalf of being a processor versus being the owner of the actual ramifications, because at the end of the day, we're a processor of their program. But I think we probably all had to engage legal to make sure we had somebody who understood what we were signing. And then knocking on wood as we sent that out, that somebody on our partner end was understanding it.
But knowing perfectly well that you would have a signature, but not an understanding, and therefore not a information to your supply chain, who then inform their own staff and their supply chain to protect the customer. So the customer was not really protected by just that signature at that time, right?
Fair, but if you wanted to continue doing work with them, that's how you were, that's how the business was going.
Let's hope that will not happen again, and that we'll be able to push back a little bit. No?
I'm sure it'll happen again. But again, I hope that we're all learning, and I hope that our industry has credibility, and I do think all of us have an obligation to take the time to try to understand things. If we're a group of people that do just sign things and don't read them, I think that will risk our credibility. And so I know it's easier to say that than to do it, because some of the things that Eric said are true, meaning that there's not much room for negotiations. And so I think, like a lot of things, you have to find the right balance. Was there a question?
I think our customers expect us to make best efforts to ensure compliance, right? And sometimes that requires, duplication of effort on our part to ensure. I think right now, not to go back to the current crisis in Ukraine, but the ever-changing list of specially designated nationals, the SDN list. Sure. Do I expect that our technology company, major technology company initiating a move of a Russian should check to see that they're not on the SDN list? I expect that. Sure. But if we move them, that's on us, right? Do we expect the movers to take a look in that, or the V&I company to take a look in that? Yeah, we do. But we've got a team checking off all those SDNs, and that's where the effort just becomes duplicative in some cases, depending on proportionality. But Eric said it from the start that you're only as good as your weakest link, and I think what they expect from us is to make the best effort. They expect our supply chain to make a best effort as well.
Okay. Was there a question somewhere?
Yeah, hey, good morning, everyone. Just from circling back to the RFP process and pricing and flipping to the back page that Jesse alluded to, for the benefit of our affiliates, is there any examples or trend you can suggest what's happening in the RFP space now? Are they moving in a certain way? Is moving getting more visibility than the other components of the mobility programs these companies have? What's the importance of moving in the whole scope of things? We all know that it's a pretty important line item in terms of cost, other than housing in the U.S. It's probably one of the biggest spends in the programs. What kind of light is it getting? Is there a point system being used? How do they weigh the decisions? And how does moving play a role in that decision for corporate clients working with RMCs? What's the ranking? I think you get the idea, yeah? Thank you.
Go.
Who do you want to ask?
I think the question, Derek, is has it changed at all? Is that the question? trends.
Are any examples around particular contracts where they've made a decision on because the moving was so important, or maybe it's not important at all, maybe housing or temporary accommodation is more important. Where do we fall in that scope, in that range?
Considering that the one time that the customer in these times, during COVID times, is in physical touch with relocation is when the mover gets in,
Yeah.
right? Because all the rest can be done online, more or less.
I don't think I know the answer, but I do think that, I think you could say that moving as a topic probably isn't, more important, and maybe I think some of these other issues are more important at the moment. But I do think relationships, I do think there's a lot of conversation with a client as to, they want to know who is your partner network. I think they know we're not providing the services, so they're absolutely interested in who are our partners, and are they the people that either they know of, or are they FIDI members, et cetera. So I do think there is a lot of that dialogue going on.
Yeah, I would say I think it depends, right? So it's kind of account by account, I think. There are some accounts where, I mean, take the auditor piece out, because that's a whole different ball of wax where it's very, very rate driven. And so forget, if you take that piece aside, I think accounts with very large programs might have a pretty robust matrices that they're going to go through from point to point, lane to lane, that they're making sure you're staying within that range, and they want to try to, ideally they all want to try to compare apples to apples. As we know, they're most of the time comparing apples to oranges. We're trying to give them, if we know that price is going to be very important, we're trying to educate on them, making sure they really hone down, including things like what the volume is and all of those things, as opposed to just what's 500 pounds cost to move from New York to London. And then there's a whole nother segment of business where the international moving rates aren't part of the RFP process. It's not something that's asked about. For those of you who knows, Aires' origins of coming from an international moving only company, sometimes you win business, and after they say, we have some international too, do you guys know how to do that? And we kind of laugh and think like, yeah, that's kind of where we came from. So I think it really depends contract to contract, oftentimes by size, oftentimes if they've engaged an auditor up front, but sometimes pricing isn't even part of it. So it varies depending on from account to account.
I think part of what drives it too, Derek, is is the client, the prospect, feeling pain right now in some specific areas. So if they're feeling pain in their moving supply chain, it may be that it's emphasized a little bit stronger than it would have been otherwise, or maybe it's a business process of some kind that they're struggling with, or it's reporting, or it's visa and immigration, or maybe do they have some negative experience that they're trying to compensate for through the RFP process. That can potentially drive more focus on one area, whether it's moving or not, than another. But to your point from earlier, I do think right now, generally speaking, other issues are rising to the top of concerns right now, other than moving. Moving's important, no doubt, important line item on the invoice, but I think that there's some other things percolating up to the top right now.
Well, for anybody who's there, saw the opening panel, Eric's colleague spoke to the trend that comes first to my mind that's changing, and there's been a little bit of a whipsaw, was this early 2020 was an acceleration of this interest in self-service and lump sum, right? Now, this really didn't come into the international space as much. It gets a lot more difficult on the international side, but certainly domestically in the U.S., we saw this kind of whipsaw, which had accelerated a trend towards interest in lump sum. Here's your $15,000, get yourself to somewhere in California, right? And I think we're seeing now a pushback. I think that was around costs and kind of a talent glut in that, too much people for not enough business, right? And now we've moved into very much of a talent war. So we're seeing less emphasis and less interest in lump sum programs. We're seeing housing coverage policies come back into the mix because they have to offer that to entice that employee come in, which is a real good thing for the relocation companies. And so I think that's the trend that I see, and I think obviously the folks at Aires have seen that as well. So I'd iterate that.
To what Jim said, that it's pain where the focus will go to. Does it mean that as movers get better at what they do, thanks to certifications and those kind of processes that we will impose through FAME, that means that they will get less priority at a certain time because it's a given that they do a good job, then?
I think so.
Is that a good development then? Because then we
Well, I
are no
think it's-
less important because we're doing it so well.
Well, again, I do think that it's a testament of all the hard work that companies do, and if you've had a good supply chain, and you know, I think my colleagues have had good management of their supply chains for many, many years, and so hopefully we are delivering good quality. And so I would say right now, this isn't our number one issue of saying, well, we really need to change quality. Capacity, of course, we could talk about capacity, but you know, quality probably is not the issue, and I think that's a good thing.
So quality is less of an issue because there are more quality movers. There's less focus on cost, so then it will be capacity then, right, Jim?
Yeah, but don't mistake it for a lack of importance,
Okay.
right? So I think because what you do is incredibly important. Nobody else can do it. So I think a point of emphasis is probably maybe a little bit more of a precise term to use, but it's always important, I think. Just from a quality service, it's always important because if anything in the move goes bad, it immediately rises to the top, right, of a priority list that needs to be worked. So I think that never consider what you do not important. It's incredibly important.
Yeah, the quality of packing is not important until the VIP move you're doing's packing is all bad.
That's right.
And then it becomes extremely important. So yeah, we never minimize that quality. And for us, it's interesting for us because most of us, if not all of us, RMCs are managing essentially the same supply chain, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we work with the same partners. We work with FIDI partners, and all of us do. So, we all have similar goals when it comes to quality. So we're all kind of in this together on our side as well.
Great. Any more questions before we go back to Steve for his next question on his list? I know you do. I know you do. Anybody? Steve will be the next one, please.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm getting a reputation here. Don't mean to.
You already have that, don't worry.
Oh, okay. I asked this question some years ago in a different place, and I thought the organisers were going to call security. I wonder if maybe I can ask it again now that we've all grown up a bit more. You've touched on technology and how technology has changed and is continuing to change. And as we all know, the rate of change of technology accelerates as every year goes by. And I just wonder how you think the changes in technology have affected the industry that you're in, the RMC's role, if you like, and the question that I was asked to leave for was, how long will it be before you're all out of work? Because everybody can do everything that you provide themselves using the technology available.
Yeah, I mean, I can start. The first answer is never. We'll never all be out of work because our business is still and always will be a human business. And I think we saw when companies tried to, we all touched on it earlier, when they tried to make it lump sum, get yourself there, and we'll see you on the other end. And we don't care if you go spend that money on 10 new televisions or you spend that money on mobility services. That didn't work. Maybe it works for new hires, maybe it works for new college graduates who are going to get a U-Haul and move themselves, but that does not work domestically in the U.S., and it certainly doesn't work globally. We saw caps come into play where, we want you to relocate them, but we don't want it to cost more than this. That's not really hitting their corporate goals when it comes to being equal. If I have a family of 7 and Jim has a family of 2, and we're in the same position, is it fair, type of thing. So I think technology will always be a part. We have 2 customers at the end of the day. We have the families we're relocating, and we have the corporate client that we're working with. And what the corporate client is looking for is kind of that, from technology, is a single pane of glass where they can see things like immigration and tax and mobility and moving all in one clear picture for them. And from an employee standpoint, oftentimes they don't want to talk to somebody until they need somebody, and then they really want to talk to somebody. So you better have that person available, and they better know what they're talking about. So I think technology will continue to evolve. I think things like point systems and all of these things that are coming in our world will continue to evolve, but I don't think it ever won't be a people business. And every time the line starts to move away from that, it always quickly comes back.
Any other reactions to that?
Go ahead.
I certainly completely agree with what Eric said, and you know, the same goes for on the moving side. I mean, the essential element of what the moving industry offers is specialized labor to step over into the threshold of our customers' homes, collective customers' homes. And that will not be replaced by robots anytime soon. So getting that right is really, really important, right, and fundamental. And just exactly what Eric said, we've seen this kind of movement back to self-service. Has anybody tried to call an airline when they've had to, when they've not had success from rebooking on a website, right? I mean, that our customers are aware that's not the model that they want from this essential element of working with their employees. So I don't see it. Will elements of it be picked up by technology? Absolutely. I think we've focused a lot on back office technology, robotic process automation, things of that nature, but I don't think the human element, at least for us, is something that, you know, we put in our values and our mission and vision, is that blend and balance of technology and human interaction.
Ben, you want to add?
I would add, I think we all would agree that, thank goodness, technology evolved to allow us to operate the way we were able to operate through COVID. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, we were, you know, so fortunate. And I know that in our organization, when we roll out some new automated process, I think there is some employee concern of, oh, you know, are you, you know, trying to eliminate this group of people? And I think we spend a lot of time saying, no, we're trying to eliminate that redundant work, the work that's not really fun or it's whatever. And I think most of us see a whole lot of opportunity within our processes that people spend a lot of time doing things still that are not just really, you know, value adding. So I'm not that expert on the technology side, like probably my colleagues, but those would be the two comments I'd make.
Does it answer your question, Steve?
One thing that I would say is that with respect to how has technology changed the role of an RMC, I think I worded that right as far as your initial question goes. My perception is that it's changed the way clients perceive the role of an RMC to a degree, and that they see us more as a provider of information in a much more robust way than they had in the past, as opposed to somebody just kind of facilitating a customer transaction in a way. So at a fundamental level, I see them relying on us more than they ever have for a flow of a certain type of information.
Any further questions? Actually, one more question myself, and we've seen in the US, particularly with the military contract, a huge change there. And although it doesn't seem to affect us, more the corporate movers directly, how do you guys as RMC see that? Again, you're not directly involved, but there will be an influence somehow with that enormous shift that's going to take place in the US. How do you see that affecting you?
My hope is if I just ignore it, it'll go away.
Yeah, we tried that.
Yeah. Drew might have the best perspective on that, because I think they're more involved than we are.
A little bit.
So I'm not sure I fully understand your question.
Well, will it have an effect on corporate movers as well in the end? I know it's purely military, and very often it's separated somehow. There are some some shifting from one to the other, no doubt. But do you think it will affect associations like FIDI, the corporate movers that FIDI usually has? Do you think there will be an effect on a ripple-on effect?
Yeah, so in the international space, I think there's still a separation of corporate movers from military movers. I think that's the case. Will that continue to be the case? I can't speculate at this moment. I can tell you from a U.S. perspective, most agencies have sought to diversify, and that's a good thing. So there needs to be a balance of business between consumer, corporate, and military business, right? If you were a purely corporate mover in 2020, then you saw your shipment volumes go down 30%, because that's what the industry dropped in the U.S., 30%. I think for those that taught them a very difficult lesson and the need to diversify. I think most have diversified, so there will be an impact, and there will be some changes. How seismic? That's a great question. The U.S. military, as most people know, moves 175,000 people annually within the U.S. and about 100,000, a little more than 100,000 annually outside of the U.S. Right? And so those are big volumes. Those are also very consistent volumes, unlike the movements we've seen in corporate and consumer or COD business, right? So it's going to it'll have a change, yet to be determined. I can speculate a lot. I'm not going to do it here, though.
Oh, that's a shame. We were just hoping for that. Anybody want to speculate on this?
I think, I think if you want a good example of how litigious the U.S. is, that's a great place to start and look. I think there's still lawsuits pending or trying to be pending.
It's a giant government contract, so
Right, yeah.
those
It's gonna be
always,
protested
anybody who
often.
follows government contracts, they will be
Sure.
argued to the till.
We certainly kept a close eye on it. I mean, we're looking at our supply chain, right, in the U.S. and globally to make sure that we are sustainable going forward, that, capacity is something we're all fighting for. So it's certainly something we keep an eye on and talk to our partner network a lot about. So to make sure that we are covered as, the good news is business is up, right, for everybody, I think. 2020 or 2020 certainly down. 2021 was a good year, and 2022 is shaping up for everybody to be a great year. So making sure capacity is there for all of us in our supply chain network is important, and keeping an eye on how that affects us is something we certainly talk about a lot.
The word sustainability has dropped a couple of times over here, in particular corporate sustainability, which is a part of FAME, no doubt. The second part of our meeting on Saturday was about corporate sustainability and FIDI trying to create a platform of stakeholders in our industry to see if we can come to a kind of common approach on this. We invited not only the RMCs, we also invited other associations like IM, EURA, Omni, Harmony, to be there and see if we can find that common platform somehow. Because what we're now seeing at this time in sustainability, that we're all finding our way somehow, each in our own way. We're looking at local legislation, we're looking at suppliers who can help us perhaps measuring, benchmarking what we do on carbon footprint if we talk about environmental sustainability. But there's no uniform way forward. How can you, as an RMC, deal with that when you don't have any data, not reliable data at least? How do you deal with that when you talk to your corporate customers?
I think we have some data. We don't have enough, and it maybe is a little general at the moment. But I do think that we're all learning from our clients and from our employees. Some of it is very specific. Some of it is a little bit more general. I know that I've found myself really trying to make certain that we're all consistent in what we mean by sustainability. And I think maybe if you asked me a year or two ago, I would probably go straight to environmental. And then as you look at it more, it really is broader than that, and it is the economic, and it is the social. And so having said that, I do think our clients are expecting us to measure things more, and whether it's in DE&I or whether it's in our carbon footprint. So I think there is consistently going to be the desire to do that, and it's going to be a challenge for all of us, but I don't think it's impossible. I think every industry is challenged with the same thing. So I think it's just something that really needs collaboration, and I'm pretty confident that we're on the journey and we'll continue on the journey.
On the long journey, Jim?
It is a long
big
journey.
steps?
Yeah, well, you learn as you go, right? And to your point, I mean, I would have said the exact same thing with respect to my perspective a year ago, right? I would have gone right to environmental and probably left it at that. And then Saturday's session I thought was particularly eye-opening when we started talking about payment terms and the economics, you know, the economic sustainability of that for people and how to treat people fairly. And I had never really thought about it in those terms. I always thought about payment terms as just, you know, a finance mandate, and that's just the way it's going to be if you want to go. And to your point, Drew, about, you know, you have to make that decision, right, to walk away from it potentially. But there's a whole other level there. There's a whole other layer of importance to it. And so definitely a long journey. We're going to continue to learn as we go and discover new things, and I think learn from each other. We've recently canvassed our supply chain and said, hey, what are you guys doing now with respect to ESG? And it's not to say you're not doing enough or one person's doing great or, you know, you're wrong and you're right. It's how can we learn from what's going on today? Because it is ever changing and ever evolving.
Eric, do you get questions from your corporate customers saying, I want your supply chain to be green in whatever, 2 years' time, whatever that means?
Yeah, I mean, we're an ISO 14001 company, which Graebel is as well, probably many of us up here are, which is that green element. So it does permeate through our whole organization and supply chain. But I think making baby steps, I think first of all, talking about it, I think having a collective, not just FIDI, but bringing in others, I think is fabulous, and having but I think making baby steps towards that as an industry, I think finding commonality will be a long process, I think, that everybody agrees to. But I think as long as we're working towards that, and things like looking at not just environmental, although environmental is probably still, I think, still the leader. I think people are still looking at, and we can provide data to our clients on their carbon footprint from their mobility program in a couple areas, typically moving final, air flights and temporary housing are kind of the three areas that they're looking at. And there are programs in place for that to help them understand what their footprint is and if they want to, work with organizations to offset that. But I think all organizations coming together, finding a common ground, will be a long journey, but it'll be a good journey, and it's a necessary journey, and it's a journey that corporate clients will expect from us. And if we work well together to give that to them before they require it, then we'll be ahead of the game.
It's more than just a trend, right? You think so, Drew?
Yeah, it better be, right? I think when you said big steps, I think it's small steps. Any step in the right direction is important.
But walking fast.
Yeah, absolutely. It requires it, I think. But any small step, right? I mean, you sometimes hear these arguments, it's just me, or it's just one thing. Well, that's where it starts, right? So that's the importance, certainly from an environmental side. We had, as Jim said, we had a significant mobilization in our company around the DE&I initiatives in the wake of some terrible events that happened in the United States. We did that for us, not as to market it out there. And we found some clients who became very interested in that, and we work with them on that. And so, is there an element of appeal of that to external constituencies? Sure, but we're doing that for us because it's the right thing to do to attract and retain talent, and be a better employer and a better corporate citizen. And so I think it's anything you do in that. Sure, is the ideal getting to some sort of standard and being able to track down to the minute detail? Yes, but you have to also understand what the cost of that, what the opportunity cost of that is in and of itself, right?
Sure.
So just start moving forward, right?
Okay. I'm happy to tell everyone that was a very good meeting we had on corporate sustainability, and there was a general agreement that we need to move on with this, and that we will create that platform, and will be next meeting planned at IM. Brian kindly supported that. Sorry, Derek, you had a question there?
I did have a question, sorry. Just a couple of great conversation, and just kind of the wheel is turning here. So there was one comment around, or we spoke a little bit about payment terms and war for talent. And when I think of affiliates within FIDI, we have war on resources and capacity issues. So with the attraction, and Drew, you also mentioned, a pivot out of the corporate space. Many people really did well, particularly in domestic US, on the domestic market, or in COD or private consumer market. So now maybe FIDI affiliates or moving companies have these decisions on resources. First of all, you can't even buy a truck these days. It's very difficult for us to find people to do the work. You have the RMC bucket of business, you have the corporate bucket of business, you have the private consumer market. Private consumer market has no compliance, very little. Private consumer market pays before the move happens. So all of a sudden, the private consumer market may become extremely attractive for moving companies versus maybe in a previous era, the corporate business and the RMC business was incredibly sexy and incredibly in demand. We wanted all part of that. Any thoughts on this capacity challenge we have, the sexiness of the private consumer market, and from the FIDI affiliates and moving perspective, our war on resources that we have? Any comments there?
I think we're still sexy.
Oh, I think so too.
Leave that to the other ones to judge.
Well, it's a huge challenge, right? And this is something, the consumer market is something that's been kind of raising its head in popularity, I think, over the last several years because of pricing challenges with respect to the U.S. domestic market in particular. And so it doesn't surprise me at all that some movers would make that decision based on their current business mix, their current model, and what they feel comfortable doing. I think a lot of agents that we all use are providing a significant amount of, or handling a significant amount of corporate volume, which is what we provide. I think there's something to be said from an RMC perspective about the consistency of transactions, the general quality of the clients, right? As far as paying their bills and all those kinds of things, you don't have that to worry about so much. So I do think that the RMC business, the corporate business, is still attractive. I think the challenge is that the movers need to bring the clients along from a pricing perspective. And the van lines have been doing that in the U.S. over the last 3 years in particular, I'd say 3 to 4 years. So I think it's getting there from a pricing perspective. But you will just have to wait and see what happens. Capacity, we're handling capacity in a number of different ways. And we think we're well positioned in that regard, as well as we can be, given the markets. But we'll see what happens with it. Continue to evolve.
Yeah, I would say it's incumbent on us to be sexy, Derek, specifically to you. But we know we're competing. We know we're competing with other RMCs. We know we're competing with the COD market, the personal move market. We know we're competing with military. We know there's other avenues out there for you to use on your business. So it is one of our corporate strategies is making sure we're paying our partners quickly. We want you to have money in your hands. We want you to be profitable. We want you to continue to invest in your organizations by being profitable. So our expectation would be that we never ever use the word vendor or agent, or we use the word partner, and it truly is a partnership. And if we're not a good partner for you, there are other good partners for you, not just in the RMC space, but in mobility. So if we're not a good partner for you, if we don't treat your employees well, if we don't pay you a fair wage, if we don't do all of those things, you will find other avenues. So we know we have to be a good partner. We have to stay sexy. As we all get older, we need to still be sexy and relevant. So for that, it is part of our corporate strategy is being a partner, a good partner to our partners, and have it be a two-way street and really a symbiotic relationship between the two companies.
Drew, do you want to add to that, or you are ready?
Yeah, Derek, you spoke a lot of truths there. You rattled off a lot of accuracies. It's a significant issue, right? Speaking from the U.S. market, where I have the most knowledge, and we're in a unique position owning 2 of the van line brands there, and we incidentally control the flow of the channels, right? We have the ability to turn off consumer and turn off military to create more capacity for our corporate customers, and that works well. That works well for us, frankly. But that being said, of course, everybody's heard the longstanding issues regarding truck drivers in the U.S. and that exists. But I've always said for quite a long time, it's not our inability to find a truck to get the goods moving. We can always find a truck. There's all sorts of opportunities. Maybe not on a traditional household goods van, but we can find something to get the shipment from point A to point B. What worries me more, and what the group inside this building has seen course, from the US this past year is the labor capacity. That has been the issue that I think has worried me for several years, and I think the concerns have started to accelerate. I'm on the board of the American Trucking Association, and our chief economist flashed up a slide at a February board meeting that was at the end of December. There were 4.6 million more job openings in the US than unemployed people. 4.6 million job openings in the US than people who are unemployed. So full employment is certainly a reality, a possibility, and a theoretical reality, and then a gap of job openings. And that is certainly hitting the type of employees and skills that we seek in the labor market at the level to move, again, into that specialization of moving over the threshold of the customer's home to do work is under significant stress, and I think that's going to continue. And that, for me, that's the biggest concern that I have relative to the moving market, not only in the U.S. but globally.
Okay, yeah, one more question over there, I can see. Run.
I hope I'm not going out of topic here, but probably trying to connect to what Derek as well said on the war on resources, and now talking about the shortage of truck drivers, for example. I was thinking, isn't the surge in prices of containers and freight costs isn't a topic as well that maybe should be on the table anytime soon? And I was thinking maybe someone else thought about it already, probably. But trying to understand, apart from the reasons why of this surge in prices of containers and ocean freight prices, but actually find a common solution as all of the associations of the industry to try and maybe find a solution, or I don't know.
Can associations solve the freight issue? Do we have enough weight to do that?
No. Not with respect to household goods. I mean, you can be an influencer, clearly, but when you look at the percentage of household goods freight compared to freight, it's just not enough.
However, so I agree with you. Yeah. A 30,000 TEU annual commitment is a drop in the bucket, yeah, right? Yeah. Sounds like a lot, but it's not much with some of our vendors. And so, that being said, I think the ATA in the U.S. was really instrumental in recently lobbying for ocean freight reform. I don't know if you've seen the act that was passed in Congress 2 weeks ago now. It's putting some handcuffs. It's directing the FMC to take a look at some of these business practices that these foreign-owned steamship lines, as long as they're foreign-owned, that gets a lot of attention from the U.S. Congress, right? Steamship lines are having. Now, as I read it, it might create some relief on the detention and demurrage practices, right? I mean, charging you for the fact that you can't get your container out of the CY, right, or out of the port, it makes no sense to people. And so I think we'll see that come down. Whether the steamship lines just roll that profitability back into their rates is yet to be seen. But I think it's getting attention. And associations, such as the American Trucking Association, which is pretty vast, do get attention when those phone calls are made on behalf of some of the conferences that exist. So I think there is some possibility. We talked a little bit in the meeting, Jesse, about the opportunity for advocacy and things of this nature, but we didn't spend too much time on it because it is difficult. Mm-hmm. It is difficult getting attention. As someone who went to Capitol Hill and argued against the removal of the tax deduction in the U.S., which did have an impact on our industry, right? Mm-hmm. They don't. It's nice for them to give you 10 minutes time, but they're really not paying attention. It's small.
I'd probably say yes, but I think we all know that it's tough because of the reasons that we just mentioned. But again, hopefully we can create the opportunity, and I know if I'm sitting in Jesse's seat, it's member help in committees and willingness to support and share information that would probably be, important to try to work more strategically together, rather than always just reporting bad news, but trying to take a more proactive stance. And
But we have to be realistic at the same time, of course, to what you said. Household goods is just minor in all of the shipping, and I wish we would have that influence, and even jointly with IAM and Omni, it would still not mean anything for the shipping industry. I'm afraid they're very powerful, so the chances that we could influence that, other than through a larger organization like ATA, is minimal, unfortunately. Any other questions? In that case, I want to thank my panel, Eric, Jim, Drew, and Ben, for being here and being in front of the firing squad. It was not too bad so far. Thank you for being here, and I hope to see you all tonight and later on today at General Assembly. Thank you.
thank you.
Well done, guys.